That morning, the wind moved with a strange stillness through the trees, as though the very air was whispering a secret. In a small village nestled on the edge of a modern city, life unfolded quietly. Most of the residents were devout Christians, faithful to their churches, singing hymns on Sundays and ringing the bells whose echoes rolled over the fields. It was a peaceful, humble place, until something extraordinary began to stir. At the far end of the village, in a modest home built from old bricks and warm memories, lived a Muslim woman named Nural and her 5-year-old daughter, Isa. Isa wasn't like other children. At first glance, she was simply a little girl. Tiny feet, curious eyes, a gentle voice. But there was something more, something deeper in her presence. Her innocence wasn't merely endearing, it was powerful. When she smiled during prayer beside her mother, it felt sacred, as if her joy connected to something beyond this world. Every night, Nural would recite du'as over her daughter, just as she had since Isa was a baby. Her words were soft, like rain tapping gently against the window. Her voice carried a tenderness woven with faith. And though Isa was only 5, she showed a startling awareness. When the adhan echoed faintly from the lone mosque on the village's outskirts, Isa would pause, eyes closed, still as if her soul knew the call. She asked questions, not the usual ones, but ones that lingered with meaning. "Mama," she whispered one day, "why do people get angry when we talk about Allah?" Nural smiled gently, brushing her daughter's hair. "Because, sweet child, sometimes truth makes people afraid. But we must never be afraid of truth. We pray for them." Yet the village wasn't always kind. While Islam was the majority faith in the broader country, this tiny pocket remained firmly Christian, rooted in old traditions. Muslims were few, often left alone, not out of respect, but suspicion. Children at school sometimes ignored Isa. Adults whispered as Nural walked past, but she never responded with bitterness. She greeted them with quiet warmth, holding Isa's hand a little tighter. Then, one morning, everything began to shift. A large gathering had been planned at the village's main church, a beautiful old stone structure with stained glass windows and towering arches. A prominent priest, Pastor Samuel, was set to deliver a special sermon. He was known far and wide, a man of passionate speech and commanding presence. Many called him the voice of the faithful. What no one knew was that Pastor Samuel had been quietly wrestling with something deep and painful. The night before the sermon, he sat alone in his study, surrounded by religious texts. His Bible lay open, but his eyes wandered. He wasn't reading, he was reflecting. Lately, a quiet tug had taken hold of his heart, a stirring, as though a voice was calling him from somewhere far away. He recalled words he'd heard in passing, about Islam, about peace, about the oneness of God. He had never truly considered them. He had dismissed them, always. But now, something was shifting inside him. That same morning, Nural and Isa were on their way to the small market. As they passed the church, Isa stopped, her gaze drawn to the tall wooden doors. She had never stepped inside, but had often asked about it. "It's where they pray, like we do," Nural had once told her. "They seek God, too, in their own way." Outside, a few people were arranging things for the sermon. Among them stood a young priest. He noticed Isa looking toward the church and offered a polite smile. Isa, innocent and curious, walked up to him and said, "Assalamu alaikum, Pastor." The priest was momentarily stunned, not offended, just surprised. "Walaikum salam," he replied awkwardly, unsure if he had said it correctly. Isa's face lit up. "My mama says we should always greet others with peace." Isn't peace beautiful?" He nodded, at a loss for words. Yet that brief exchange lingered with him. Inside the church, Pastor Samuel prepared to speak. When he stepped to the podium, silence fell across the pews. He began, as always, with confidence. But as he spoke about love, truth, spiritual yearning, his voice trembled. There was a subtle shift in his tone, a vulnerability. His words, though eloquent, felt heavy. The other priests exchanged glances. Something in him had changed. Outside, Isa and her mother sat on a bench near the church garden. Isa looked up at the towering cross, then at the sky. "Mama, if they pray too," she asked softly, "why do people say we're different?" Nural placed a gentle hand on her daughter's chest. "Because, my love, hearts sometimes forget that truth doesn't belong to one place, but Allah knows what lives in every heart." Later that afternoon, Isa returned to the church alone. She stood silently by the steps as people exited. Lifting her small hands to the sky, she whispered, "Ya Allah, guide everyone who seeks you, even if they don't know they're seeking." Guide the pastor. Isa slowly opened her eyes and replied, "I'm waiting to see if hearts can hear silence." He chuckled. "That's a heavy thought for such a small girl." She just smiled. Inside, Pastor Samuel stood at the altar flipping through notes for his next sermon. But the words felt alien. He stared at the page, but nothing resonated. They wouldn't settle in his heart. Frustrated, he let the papers fall from his hands and stepped outside, hoping the air might clear the fog inside him. As he walked into the yard, he saw Isa standing there quietly, eyes closed, a stillness about her that unsettled him. He froze. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something passed between them, wordless but powerful. Isa approached. "Hello, Pastor." "Hello, little one," he answered, his voice gentler than usual. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone touched with the kind of simple kindness only children can give. He nodded slowly. "I think I'm learning something, but I don't yet understand what it means." Isa looked up and said, "That's what my mama says truth feels like. Scary at first, but warm when you let it in." He couldn't help but smile. That night, for the first time in months, Pastor Samuel wrote in his journal. He wrote about the girl, about the strange peace that lingered in her presence, about the questions that had begun growing louder in his soul. He wrote, "If truth is what I've always sought, why do I fear where it's leading me?" Meanwhile, in a modest home across the village, Isa and her mother Nural sat together in the soft glow of a single lamp. The Quran lay open on the table. Isa rested her head in her mother's lap. "Mama," she whispered, "will the pastor ever know Allah?" Nural stroked her daughter's hair. "If Allah wills, Isa. Sometimes the smallest prayers travel the longest distance." In the church, Pastor Samuel, the once unshakable voice of doctrine, now sat with trembling hands and a restless heart. He did not yet know it, but he had already stepped onto the very path he once feared, the path of truth. The village had no idea that the quiet faith of one little girl was about to stir every soul in ways they never expected. In that quiet village, where time moved slowly and the church bell rang each Sunday like a lullaby of tradition, a ripple of unrest had begun. What began as a whisper inside Pastor Samuel was now echoing through pews and homes. Something had shifted, not only within him, but within the hearts of those who had always looked to him for certainty. 2 weeks had passed since Isa greeted the pastor. 2 weeks since her small voice and innocent words landed like raindrops on dry ground. And now, the soil had begun to crack, not from destruction, but from the hope of something new growing, Within his simple home, Pastor Samuel had stopped pretending, at least to himself. The confident sermons, the rehearsed phrases, those had faded. Each time he stood at the pulpit, his voice trembled, his certainty wavered. He noticed the way the congregation watched him now, some puzzled, some concerned, some quietly hopeful. The elders noticed too. "He's different," one whispered during a meeting. "He speaks of love, but questions doctrine." Another replied, almost in a whisper, "I don't blame him. I've been questioning too." But not everyone welcomed the doubt. Clara, who had grown up in the church, was furious. Her hands shook as she folded hymn sheets. "This is not the man I once admired," she told her circle of friends. "He's slipping, letting strange influences into our sacred space." One woman asked, "Do you think it's that Muslim girl?" "The child." Clara's voice sharpened. "She's part of it. Her mother too. This isn't curiosity anymore, it's infiltration." But after that, no one said anything, because deep down, many of them had felt it too. A softness, a stirring, a quiet urge to ask what if. Isa remained unaware of these hushed conversations. Life, for her, was the same, except she prayed more. Her lips whispered du'as while playing in the garden, even while tying her shoelaces. One evening, she asked her mother, "Mama, can the heart hear before the ears?" Nural smiled. "Yes, Habibti. The heart often hears first. That's how Allah guides." Isa nodded thoughtfully. That night her prayer was whispered with even more conviction. "O Allah, open every heart that is ready, even if the mind is not." That same night, Pastor Samuel couldn't sleep. Again, he paced through his home like a restless shadow, past the study, the kitchen, and finally to his small corner of prayer. He sat down, looked upward, and whispered, "God, if you're still listening, show me what I'm not seeing." The next evening, he made a quiet decision. He would visit Isa and Nural, not as a pastor, but as a seeker. Just before sunset, he arrived at their door, hands empty, heart full of doubt. Their house was small, simple, and filled with warmth. Nural opened the door, surprised but calm. She greeted him with a peace that disarmed him. "Pastor," she tasked. Samuel paused. Her question wasn't an attack. It was a plea. "I'm saying, I don't have all the answers. Maybe I never did. I've met with people I once feared. I've listened to words I once rejected, and I've felt peace." A stunned silence followed. "I haven't converted," he added quickly, "but I can't ignore the stillness I feel when I listen to their prayers, their submission, their love for the one God." Voices rose. "He's lost his way. This is blasphemy." But there were also quiet tears, tears from those whose hearts had already begun to stir, those who had felt the same gentle pull towards something they couldn't name. "I'm not here to divide," Samuel said. "I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm asking you to seek, to feel, to ask." Clara stood abruptly. "You are meant to lead us in Christ, not question him." "I'm not questioning Christ," he replied gently. "I'm questioning the box we've locked truth inside." Clara walked out. Several followed her, but many remained. Outside, under the oak tree, Isa stood clutching her mother's hand. The stained glass glowed in the fading light. She didn't know what had been said inside, but she knew something had changed. That evening, the village buzzed with talk. The church service was on every tongue. Some called for Pastor Samuel's removal. Others stayed silent. And a quiet few began to come. There was a knock on Nuro's door. "Can we talk?" asked a middle-aged couple, their tone gentle. Not to argue, just to understand. Nuro welcomed them inside, offered them tea, and sat with quiet patience. From behind a curtain, little Isa peeked out, her face glowing with a silent joy. Their questions were sincere, about prayer, the Quran, the reason Muslims pray 5 times a day, and why Islam never depicts God. Nuro answered each one with calm warmth. "There is no compulsion in Islam," she said softly, "but there is clarity. We believe in one God, without partners, without images, and our peace comes from surrendering fully to Him." The older woman with silver-streaked hair nodded slowly. "I've always wondered why Muslims look so calm when they pray. It's like they're actually talking to someone." "They are," Nuro replied. "We all are, but Islam teaches us how to listen too." And so, night after night, small gatherings began to form, people coming quietly, in secret, not to convert, but to listen, to learn. The mosque in the neighboring village, once still and forgotten, started to see new faces. Faces it had never seen before. But change never arrives without resistance. Clara called a private meeting. She gathered the most devout members of the church, those who feared their traditions were under siege. "They're trying to steal our pastor, our faith, our children," Clara warned. A man in the group hesitated. "But what if it's not theft?" he asked. "What if it's truth?" Clara's voice rose. "Are you willing to throw away everything we've ever believed?" But fear was no longer enough to hold people back. Something more powerful had begun moving through the village. It wasn't argument, it wasn't force, it was presence. Isa's presence. Everywhere she went, people felt calmer. Her silence said more than their shouting. Her innocence made even the most certain hearts tremble. One day, Clara spotted Isa in the market, sitting on a bench, eating fruit with a Christian child. The two of them were laughing, sharing, unafraid, untouched by barriers. Clara stared at them for a long while, something inside her beginning to crack. That evening, Clara did something no one expected. She knocked on Pastor Samuel's door. "I'm angry," she said as soon as he opened it, "but I'm also confused." He stepped aside. "Then you're already halfway to the truth," he said gently. They sat, they talked, and they cried. Not about Islam, not about conversion, but about fear, about loss, and the terrifying beauty of change. And while the adults wrestled with their hearts, Isa continued to pray every night. "Ya Allah, keep the doors open. Don't let their hearts close before they hear you." The village was no longer the same. The winds had shifted. The walls had begun to crack, and behind every moment of that quiet revolution stood the smallest hands. The village no longer whispered. It buzzed. What began as quiet tension had become a visible spiritual storm. Lines were being drawn, not just between neighbors, but within people's own hearts. Families sat at dinner tables discussing religion in ways they never had before. Church elders held more frequent meetings. And in the center of this storm stood a 5-year-old girl who never raised her voice. Yet, somehow, everyone could hear her. Pastor Samuel walked more slowly these days, not because he was weary, but because the burden on his heart had grown heavier. He wrestled not just with his own doubts, but with the weight of those who looked to him for guidance. Every knock on his door brought another story. "I heard your sermon," said a man who had never missed a Sunday. They sat together. No pushing, no conversion, just two men, servants of God, sharing tea and truth. "Why do you pray like that?" Samuel asked. "Because God is near," said the imam, "and when he is near, the body, the tongue, and the soul must all submit." Samuel closed his eyes. The simplicity struck him. Submit. Not debate, not defend. Just submit. When he left the mosque that day, he didn't feel resolved, but he felt lighter. News of his visit spread quickly, as it always does in small towns. Some were outraged, others afraid. But many remained quiet, not with judgment, but with thought. That Sunday the church was unusually full. Everyone came to hear what he would say. He stood before them, Bible in hand, but did not open it. "I have not abandoned my faith," he began. "I've deepened it." Some looked confused, others leaned forward. "I believe in truth. I believe in seeking. And I believe that God is not bound by fear. If a child's prayer can shake her faith, then perhaps her faith wasn't built on truth to begin with." A few clapped softly. Most just sat, stunned into silence. "I will continue preaching. I will continue serving. But I will no longer pretend to be blind where my heart has begun to see." That evening he returned to Nuro's home. This time his eyes held no fear, only stillness. Isa greeted him with a wide smile. "Did the mosque help?" she asked, like a child asking if he had enjoyed the park. He chuckled. "Yes, little one. More than I expected." Nuro prepared tea again. But this time Samuel brought something with him, a notebook filled with questions. They sat for hours, not as a pastor and a Muslim, but as people, as seekers. In the corner, Isa drew with colored pencils. When she finished, she held up her paper. It showed a mosque and a church side by side, the sun above them, and two stick figures, one in a dress, one in a robe, holding hands. "This is you and me, Pastor," she said sweetly. He took the drawing with trembling hands. That night he didn't sleep, not from unrest, but because he had finally realized something profound. Peace isn't the absence of questions. It's the presence of truth. By the following week, the village had become a mirror, each face reflecting an inner struggle. Some masked it behind loud words, others hid it in quiet silences, and some, like Pastor Samuel, chose to face it openly. He was no longer the same man. His suits felt heavier. His sermons, though still passionate, came from a deeper place, a place beyond loyalty to tradition, a place nearer to truth. But truth demands a price. Church attendance began to drop. Not drastically, but enough to notice. Some families, once fixtures in the pews, stopped coming altogether. Others attended quietly, avoiding his gaze. Yet some, especially the young, stayed behind after services. They asked questions, not just about Christianity, but about Islam, about prayer, about what it meant to surrender. Samuel never claimed to have all the answers, and strangely, that made more people trust him. Meanwhile, Nuro's home had become something new, a refuge. There were no banners, no dawah tables, no arguments, just warmth, tea, and space to breathe. Clara's husband, who once crossed the street to avoid Nuro, now came weekly. He sat silently as she explained the meaning of Surah al-Ikhlas. An elderly woman, whose grandson had left faith behind, began asking questions about the afterlife. Even the local librarian came to borrow an English translation of the Quran, something no one had ever done in that village. And Isa watched it all, calm and quiet, the still eye in a spiritual storm. She never said, "I did this." She just smiled, prayed, and remained the same child who once asked, "Why don't people talk nicely about religion?" But peace didn't reign everywhere. In a nearby town, church leaders had heard of the unrest. One Sunday morning, two men in dark suits visited Pastor Samuel. "We're from the regional council," one said. "Your recent actions have raised concerns." Samuel nodded. I expected this. You're confusing people, the man said. They don't know what you stand for anymore. Samuel looked them in the eyes. I stand for God. A long silence. Which God? They asked, and though the question was soft, it echoed like thunder. I stand for truth, said Pastor Samuel. Wherever this leads, you're treading a dangerous path, someone warned. No, he replied calmly. I'm treading it carefully. When they left, he remained alone in the church for a long while. The wooden pews, the altar, the crucifix, symbols he had known all his life, now seemed wrapped in a cloud of unfamiliar questions. And yet he felt no guilt. He felt guided. That evening, he returned to Nural's home, not as a guest this time, but as family. I want to learn, he said. Truly, not just from books, but from the heart. Nural gave a gentle nod. Then the door is open. Isa brought him a small Quran. It's in English, she said. Mama and I read it sometimes. You can